So I want to start this morning by acknowledging the space that we are on. We are living here in the United States. For most people that are here, they're living on stolen land. I want to open this space up with good intentions for all. I want to remember that this is a space here in Chicago where the Ottawas were, where all of the Illinois tribes were, the Kaskaskia, the Tamaroa, the Cahokia, and that's where the word Illinois comes from. And also that this place, Chicago, is a native name. It's often wrongly said to be the place of onions or the stinking place, but it was actually named after a kind of native garlic that was here that grew on these shores. It's a Miami word. I also want to acknowledge all the indigenous peoples that live here in Chicago, because a lot of people don't know that the majority of native peoples now live off reservations and in major cities. Chicago is also the site of the Great Migration, where from 1916 to 1970, Black folks from all over the South came in the Northern Migration. Was a terminal point for the railroads, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters organized. It's on that line between Chicago and New Orleans. Famous City of New Orleans line. It was a major route for the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. The conceptual framework for this session today is available in an abbreviated form in the packet, but basically what we're talking about is the twin pillars of the history of the United States, the basis in which this country exists, which is stolen land, dispossessed land, and African slavery. So socialists should understand that that's the root of this country that we live in. And we don't just advocate for self-determination and national liberation abroad in countries that are colonies or that were colonies, like all of the anti-colonial movements that we know about throughout the 20th century, but we also advocate for self-determination and national liberation for internalized oppressed peoples here. So I hope that everyone will enjoy the session, that everyone has an opportunity to engage in discussion and feedback in the session. And now I'm going to pass it over to Rhiana.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, good. Call and response group, which is great. That's how I operate when I don't like to hear back. So, wonderful. Hi, my name is Rhiana Anthony. I am living currently in Nashville, Tennessee. Organizer with Black Lives Matter Nashville, as well as an organizer for Case United, which is a resident-led organization that is fighting against the displacement of public housing residents in a redevelopment project. And I'm originally from Houston, Texas, if anyone's from there, yay. And I'm just really grateful and glad to be here today. I'm gonna speak on a number of topics, so follow with me. There's a common thread throughout them. But mainly I wanna talk about a couple of things today. I'm briefly gonna talk through what is oppression, anti-oppression frameworks, how do you understand it and see it showing up in organizations or in your work and in the world, and what the signs of that are. Then I'm going to talk about a national initiative that has happened. Oh no. Okay. Are you okay? Great. Okay. That has happened within the last year, called the Black Land and Liberation Initiative, that is backed by Blackout Collective out of Oakland, which is a Black woman, Black femme-led direct action collective, and Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project. And This was a huge vision, particularly centered around what would it look like for us to do direct action, as well as start having conversations about land-based reparations. And so I am going to talk about some of those things, as well as just some different things of my work and how it relates to the socialist framework or different ideas that are in socialism and how they're connected together. So that's the arc of my time. But before I start, just a little about myself. I am a witchy, spiritualist type of person. So I always start and do anything that is rooted in visualization, meditation, somatics types of things. And so we're going to do a little bit of that before I even get talking. And so I want everyone, if they could, to just close their eyes for a minute. Get comfortable into yourself. I know this is unorthodox, and that's just what we need to get forward. Yeah? So I just want you to briefly just close your eyes. Take a couple of deep breaths in through your nose. Let your stomach expand. And then breathe it out and let your stomach come in. Take another breath in. Breathe out. Another deep breath in. Breathe out. Breath is so important. So I want you to take note of the ways in which your body is reacting to that breath, what tensions are released, what things feel tighter, what are areas that hurt, what are areas that you need to give more attention to, and be cognizant of that. At this very moment, I'm going to ask you to tense up your whole body, just as rigid and as tense as you can. Just squeeze and squeeze and squeeze until you can't squeeze anymore. Just tense, 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 tense. Hold it, and then let it go. Okay, we're gonna do it again. Tense, 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 tense. As tight as you can get it. Feel it everywhere. And then release. Okay. You can open your eyes now. Okay. So, in this activity, that is, for me, the type of work that we need to be doing, is our bodies have been commodified, have been made into tools instead of living, breathing things. And it's our work as well to be a constant reminder to ourselves that we are not those things, right? That we have to constantly be in the action of throwing off oppression, of being aware of ourselves, aware of our bodies, aware of our breath. This whole movement that has started is all about loss and the inability of people to not be able to breathe, right? To not be able to live and flourish and have their being in our society. And so it is up to us at every moment to humanize ourselves, because they're not going to do it. Okay, so in anything you do, any practice, always start with humanization of self. Because if we don't do it, they won't do it. And then in our work as well, we regenerate those really toxic behaviors that we're trying to rage against. So just wanted to start off with that. Briefly, we're going to go right into just a little bit about oppression, and if people are familiar with that. Can anybody tell me what oppression means? Go for it.
I think when I think of oppression, what I think of is like people not being able to achieve their needs, being held back from what they should be able to do.
Yeah. Anything else? Anybody have another definition of oppression? Okay, cool. We'll start at the base. So oppression doesn't just happen. It's a process, and it has been a continued process and endeavor. First thing first, on a very basic level, is stereotypes. People hear stereotypes all the time. Starts with thoughts. thoughts and ideas about people, about how people are supposed to be in the world, how we think they should be, which is taught, which is learned behavior. Then we have prejudice. Those thoughts start to come and change how we interact with other people in the world, how we engage with them interpersonally. And then this little thing in between prejudice develops. If you're lucky, if you have a little power and privilege, you get the honor of being discriminatory. Discrimination. So discrimination is prejudice plus power and privilege. Okay. So when people say, that's reverse racism and like all these things, it goes a little different than that. Those things aren't really effectually correct in that those people cannot discriminate in a larger society where white people are the dominant and target group, or dominant group. And then oppression. So this accumulation of discrimination over time of a people or a target group is oppression. All right. There are 5 things that an educator, Iris Young, describes as the things that show that we are having oppression or signs of oppression. Exploitation, which I'm sure this group is familiar with. If exploitation is present, oppression is present. Marginalization, meaning whoever is on the perimeter, who is left out of the center, who is not considered in decision making, in form and design, in the way that our society is created, that is a sign of oppression. Powerlessness. Powerlessness is a sign of oppression. Any group that is not given the power to determine for themselves, to self-decide, decision make, what is of best interest for themselves and of their family for survival, is powerlessness. This also is aligned with a culture of silence, right? Anytime that a culture of silence is present, that is powerlessness. When your voice is stifled, okay? Last one is cultural imperialism, fourth one is cultural imperialism. Meaning any norms, values, songs, cultures that are being hierarchied or put over another, or saying my culture is better than yours, and so I'm going to squash and eliminate any generation or any form of that, is cultural imperialism and is oppression. And the last thing is violence. Anytime violence is present, it doesn't matter who's inflicting it, oppression is present. That power dynamic can never be escaped, right? And that someone is in an active action of suppressing another. And so when I talk about some of the work that I'm doing, I'm constantly thinking about those things and how they show up in how we interact with each other, how they've historically showed up for us in being able to assert dominance. When we talk about slavery, which is the bedrock of American economics, don't forget that. It started the wealth and generation of America through the institution of slavery. When we understand that all of those different elements existed and still exist, and we're constantly combating those things, we are better off and can do this work more effectively. But it all comes from self-awareness, which is where we started from the beginning. And so I didn't really know what I was going to say when I got here, to be honest, with this group. But I definitely think it's important to constantly, we're not just here to learn things, but we're here to transform the way that we do things and transform our organizations. And so out of this talk, out of whatever it is, I hope that you're actively thinking about how in my organization, how in my organizing work, I may be an oppressive force. How am I manipulating and using power and privilege? And how am I being unaware of how it affects those around me, constantly doing that work of throwing off the chains, as Assata Shakur would say, we have nothing to lose but our chains, which is a mantra for the Black Lives Matter and Movement for Black Lives movement. Okay. Last thing, I'm gonna just talk a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing. Currently, I'm organizing with Black Lives Matter Nashville. I've been doing that and one of the founders there for about 3 years, which is super exciting. Actually on the national strategy table as well. And some of the work that I'm doing, particularly around KC United, which is a group that came together around public housing. I know that many many cities around the country and even our national level has found public housing to not be necessary anymore, which we know is not true. Even just a little history, even public housing is something that was initiated out of labor movements and out of the importance of workers needing affordable sanitary housing. And so we know that it's still a need today as more and more people are being marginalized and are not getting the proper wages to be able to afford housing. So we're in a state right now where there are two things that are happening. The national government through HUD is enacting RAD. I forget acronyms quickly, but it's RAD. Yeah. RAD is a system where basically the national government, HUD, is saying, this is too much for us. We can't do this anymore. We are going to give local cities, local municipalities the power and ability to do what they need for their public housing because we, on the national level, can't do it all, okay? Which is good in essence, right? Like, oh yeah, local folks know what people need on the local level, that's good. But it has turned into a nightmare for many cities, and that whenever that public land is transferred over to the cities, most cities decide, well, who needs it? And so when you have the case of New Orleans, which was catapulted and the trajectory of the dissolution of public housing was sped up through Hurricane Katrina, you literally have cities and cities and cities that are saying public housing is no longer a need, and these folks just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and acclimate and conform to the rest of society. And so we're in a state right now where our city controls the land, owns the land, and Nashville is in a peculiar situation where our development agency and our housing authority are the same people. How fun. And a conflict of interest. So currently our city is taking all the public housing and converting them into mixed income housing. Meaning that individuals that are currently under public housing are now, they say will make it into the new development, but there are new stipulations, right? Because now it's a mixed income development. It is no longer considered public housing. And so individuals have to pay their own utilities. They have to pay for relocation costs, all these different things. And the process, we know that people get moved along. This is also a 10-year project, right? They're doing it step by step by step and in phases. Most of it with the hopes that people will just move away, or the cost of living will get so high that they can't afford to live in the area, which is the case in Nashville, where public housing is sitting in East Nashville, who has been rapidly gentrified over the last 5 years. And public housing is literally the only black speck in the neighborhood. And through the dissolution of public housing, the idea is, hey, let's get everybody in here, right? So we have this narrative of diversity and inclusion that is really a tool that is being used to push out people who are poor, people who are black, people who are immigrants. We have a huge immigrant population, Somali immigrant population that is in Nashville that lives in public housing. One of the most shocking things I won't say shocking, but one of the most heartbreaking things for me as an organizer, just meeting people, is I had a Know Your Rights workshop with some residents, and there was a young Somali woman there, and I was telling them, yeah, you're gonna have to pay your own utilities and do all this, and she was like, what is that? What is that? What is an electric bill? What is this? What is that? Thinking about those people that are coming into our country that have a completely different context, who are from war-torn countries or experience other traumas and other things, and are being completely asked to just figure it out. And when I think about, this is directly what neoliberalism and this push for this kind of advanced capitalism is pushing. Privatization, right? Like, how can we take all of these public goods that people have been utilizing and make them into a private sector? We have militarization. So in the course of the last 5 years since this redevelopment project has happened, police, the MMPD, which is our Metro Police Department, has implemented a flex force in all public housing facilities. They have a new contract with our police department to actually, so on top of the regular police that patrol the area, they have special task force that are specifically stationed in public housing. One of those officers actually murdered and killed and shot a resident 3 times in the back in February. And our groups have been doing a lot of work around demilitarization of public housing. Because the police, their main task is for the protection and the enclosure of wealth and property for the owning class. Then we have the elimination of public sector needs, that all of our survival needs are being thrown into the market. Whether it's food, whether it's housing, clothes, all of these things are put into the private sector. And so if you cannot compete in that, done. One and done. And so I do want to, I think I'm on time. Pretty sure it's at 15 minutes. Okay. I feel like I've been rambling. But the work around that I've experienced is deeply tied to, this socialist framework. I was telling someone earlier, I'm a newbie. I'm not anyone I'm not politically advanced in my ideology or anything like that, but I've seen some things, I've made some connections, which is really what it takes. But and then I just want to talk a little bit even just about the trauma that's inflicted when that happens, right? Is we've got people who've historically lived in public housing, lived in and depended on the government for things and public works and things like that. And they have their flaws, but they have been able to be safety nets for a lot of people and allowed them to have a foundation. And the ways that our cities are moving, whether it's through gentrification, the elimination of public housing, privatization of all types of things, we are in a state of emergency on so many levels for us to actively create networks for each other to take care of ourselves. The next part of my organizing that I'm really wanting and focusing on is centered on literally institution building. I'm not a pessimist in any way, but I do know that there is a different way forward and it's not leaning in our favor. And so we've got to really be proactive and do what we need to do to be able to take care of each other. I know that one of the things that our crew in Nashville is doing is some different community defense groups. I know ICE is huge in a lot of cities right now. It's huge everywhere. So our immigrant population, our folks that don't have protection, don't have sanctuary, are being swept up every day. As well as I want us to have an engaged conversation about what expanded sanctuary looks like. How are we taking care of and expanding sanctuary for our Black folks that have experienced throughout history displacement and loss and homelessness? And those of our people that are LGBT and queer, who the biggest population of people that are homeless and without and dispossessed are young LGBT teenagers and teens who are living on the streets and have been kicked out of their homes. And there's so many people, and when we pay attention to the margins, like yesterday, the disability justice workshop was fabulous. When we're keeping that in mind, of like when we pay attention to the margins, and we adequately and work towards people on the margins getting free, we all get equally freer. It gets easier for everybody. And so I do want to talk a little bit, just briefly, about the Black Land and Liberation Initiative, about land-based reparations. This is a huge conversation, and I can't even try to fit it into a 15-minute talk. but we can definitely talk. I'll be here through Friday. This project is a huge land reclamation as well as just spiritual ancestral healing project. So the ideology behind the land-based reparations is that when people are able to have the means to produce for themselves, to generate for themselves, to self-determine, to self-govern, that alongside with the rights that we have been fighting for is how we get free. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions and things about reparations. Is it possible? Can it be done? There's a lot of nuances because we're such a mixed up country. We're such a mixed up country. Who's black? Who's white? Who's this? Who's that? And that's a complex conversation. But the whole purpose of this project is to acquire the land to liberate the land, if that makes sense. How are people that have a specific framework about how our relationship to land and destroying the idea of ownership, right? How we collectively own the land, if those people actually have the land, that there will be a shift in power, a shift in culture, and a shift in the way that we do things. And so, in the land-based reparations argument, it's centered on how do we identify those institutions, those individuals, and those entities that have historically built their wealth and taken and dispossessed land from people to generate the wealth that is America. When we think about banks, when we think about insurance companies, we think about major universities. Universities wreaked havoc. I actually went to Vanderbilt, which a founding father or founding, captains of industry, right, of this country. My school even still has scholarships for people who are descendants of Confederate soldiers and has monuments all over the campus. And Vanderbilt and universities are continually taking up land around themselves and expanding themselves. And so there's a black neighborhood historically in Nashville, Edge Hill, that is on the periphery of Vanderbilt. So you have Vanderbilt, who I think an article came out in Forbes of like the top 10 universities with the 1% in them. Vanderbilt is on there. And so it is like a haven for the 1% children, literally next to one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in the city. And every year, every day, they are constantly encroaching upon that space that are in our black neighborhoods. And so I do just want to leave you, I know Kali have been a help and part of this initiative, and so he may talk about it some more. But I do want to make the case for land-based reparations in that there are things that are owed. There has to be a repair and a reconciliation that is necessary that our country has not dealt with. Whether that is in our lineage, in the distribution of resources, and I just want people to walk away with an imagination of like how this could be possible. I don't have all the answers, this isn't panned out. But when we look at the history of redlining and disposition and all the things and entities that have kept black people out of the market for housing, out of the market for land and property, land-based reparations is definitely a framework that I think can help us move forward and reimagine like how we can be with each other, some autonomous spaces where we can build community and reconnect to the land, reconnect to our culture, and really build the world that we want to see. And so